Hi, I'm Amara. They used to call me the family disgrace. Not behind my back, not with subtle whispers, but with direct looks, forced smiles, and the kind of silences that said more than words ever could. I was the girl who didn't follow the plan, who asked the wrong questions, wore the wrong clothes, took the wrong jobs, and loved the wrong people. My name is Amara Langdon, and I wasn't supposed to be anyone important. Not according to them. My parents built Langdon and Rowe from scratch, a real estate empire with glass walls and steel smiles, with my older brother Micah as the shining heir and my cousin Tessa as the polished face of the brand.
Me?
I was the girl who dropped out of her MBA in year 2, who chose design over finance, art over spreadsheets, passion over practicality. They called me reckless, unreliable, emotional, a liability to a legacy. But I remember everything. Every cutting remark, every boardroom where I was asked to take notes while my ideas were passed off as someone else's. Every family photo where I was placed on the edge. Every gala where my name wasn't printed in the brochure. I remember being told to just be grateful. To stay quiet, stay small, stay safe.
So I did.
For a while. I kept my head down, paid off my student loans by freelancing for clients who didn't care where I came from. I worked late into the night designing interiors for restaurants, building brands for small businesses, taking on whatever job paid enough to keep my apartment lights on. They didn't notice, of course. They never asked. Until one day, 2 years ago, I got a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was a venture capitalist in New York. He said he'd seen my work for a boutique hotel chain in Miami and wanted to know if I'd consider rebranding a struggling luxury property group. I didn't say yes right away. I was cautious. But when I flew out and saw the project, I felt something shift inside me. It was risk, yes, but it was mine. So I took it. Quietly. I built the brand from scratch. No nepotism, no family name. Just me, my ideas, and a relentless work ethic that came from years of being underestimated. The company we built, Ash and Alder, was sleek, soulful, and successful within its first year. Investors took notice. Clients followed. My name began appearing in articles. My photo in design magazines. Still, I said nothing. Not to my parents. Not to Micah. Not even to Tessa, who always had a polished smirk reserved just for me. I wanted to build without the weight of their expectations or criticisms. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was chasing freedom. But freedom has a way of making noise, especially when success follows it. 6 months ago, I got an email from a senior executive at Langdon and Rowe. He was polite, professional, and very curious. He wanted to schedule a collaborative discussion about potential branding partnerships. At first, I laughed. Then I realized they didn't know. They were reaching out to Ash and Alder without realizing who was behind it. And instead of ignoring it, I did something else. I said yes. Not for spite. For strategy. I walked into that meeting wearing a navy suit I had tailored myself, and heels that didn't click too loudly. The boardroom was filled with people who had known me since I was a teenager. Only now they were confused. They stared like they were trying to recognize a face they should have never forgotten. The presentation went smoothly. They asked questions, I answered. They nodded, impressed. But when I clicked to the final slide and the company founder's name appeared, Amara Langdon, the silence was sudden and sharp. Tessa's face changed first. Not rage. Not fear. Confusion. Then realization. Then something colder. Micah didn't speak at all. My father adjusted his cufflink, a nervous tell. My mother kept her eyes on the folder in front of her. I didn't gloat. I didn't explain. I simply finished the pitch and walked out with the same grace they never taught me, but I learned anyway. I didn't expect a call back. But I got one. And another. They wanted Ash and Alder involved.
Publicly.
They said our aesthetic was exactly what Langdon and Rowe needed to modernize. I agreed to a limited partnership. My name would be listed. My designs would be used. My team would handle the rollout. They didn't even realize what they were giving me. Access. That was the moment the real story began. Because 3 weeks into the partnership, I discovered something strange. A file, misnamed, buried in a shared drive. It looked like a budget spreadsheet. But when I opened it, I found something else entirely, an internal audit report marked confidential. It showed misappropriation of funds, unexplained transactions, and payouts listed under dummy shell accounts. I didn't know what it all meant yet, but I knew enough to know something was wrong. Very wrong. I didn't confront them. I didn't raise alarms. I copied the file and sent it to my own attorney. Then I started paying attention. I began showing up to more meetings. I offered to help streamline communication between the two companies. They said yes, of course. Anything to leverage the image of collaboration. Tessa even posted a photo of us on LinkedIn. The caption said, "Sometimes the best partners are the ones you never expected." She got thousands of likes. I got confirmation. They were blind. And then, like all things built on ego and fraud, the cracks started showing. Their flagship project stalled without reason. An executive quietly resigned. A press leak surfaced about internal restructuring. I watched it all unravel slowly, like thread pulled from a very expensive sweater. Meanwhile, Ash and Alder grew. We doubled our team, expanded our client base, and even started receiving offers to buy us out. But I wasn't interested in selling. Not yet. I wanted one more thing first. I wanted the truth to come out. Not just to expose them, but to reclaim what they had tried to erase in me. The next twist came in the form of a voicemail. A former employee of Langdon and Rowe, who'd left 3 years ago after accusing them of harassment. She'd seen the articles about Ash and Alder. She knew who I was. She said, "You don't know me, but I know what they did to you. I have something you need to see." I met her in a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. She was nervous, but steady. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were copies of memos, emails, and board minutes from years ago. One, dated the day after I dropped out of the MBA, had my name printed in red at the top. It read, "Recommend removal from inheritance list due to behavioral concerns and lack of contribution to family objectives." I stared at the words. Behavioral concerns. Lack of contribution. They hadn't just judged me. They'd erased me from their future. Quietly. Permanently. I thanked her. I didn't ask why she'd kept the files. I knew. Some people keep proof, not out of spite, but survival. I returned to my office that evening, laid out every document, and began mapping the connections. I didn't have all the pieces yet, but I had enough. Enough to shake them. Enough to begin. And it began with an email. I sent it directly to the board of Langdon and Rowe. It was polite. Professional. Just a request for a joint press release stating that Ash and Alder would be transitioning out of the partnership by mutual agreement. No drama. No reasons given. Just strategy. But attached to the email was a second document. It wasn't for public eyes. It was for them. It outlined, in simple bullet points, everything I knew. The fraudulent transactions. The falsified audits. The personal accounts linked to company funds. It was concise, damning, and signed with my full name. No bluff. No threats. Just truth. I didn't get a reply for 2 days. Then I got 3. First, an apology from their legal team. Second, a signed agreement to release Ash and Alder from all ties, with full ownership of design IP returned to us. And third, a resignation announcement from Tessa, posted on the company's social media at midnight. The caption was brief. "After years of dedicated service, I've chosen to pursue new opportunities. I wish the team at Langdon and Rowe continued success." No comments were allowed, but people noticed, and they started asking questions. That was enough for now. But the real move was still coming, because as they scrambled to plug holes in their sinking ship, I was quietly doing something else. I'd filed for a trademark 2 months ago. A new brand. A reimagined vision. And its name was Langdon Studio. My name. My future. My design. The family name they tried to cut me from was about to shine in a way they never expected. And this time, it would be mine alone. 2 weeks after the partnership officially ended, I received an invitation I never expected. A glossy, Gold-embossed card slid under my office door, sealed with the Langdon and Rowe insignia. It was for the company's annual investor gala. The same event I had been excluded from for 6 years straight. The same event where Tessa used to wear my designs and call them her vision. The invitation was unsigned. No note. No contact name. But the message was clear. They wanted me to show up. Maybe to prove something. Maybe to bait me. Maybe because they were running out of options and needed a distraction with a recognizable face. What they didn't know was that I already had a plan. One that didn't involve polite nods or staged smiles. I RSVP'd without hesitation and began preparing, not just a dress, but a reveal. Something undeniable. Something they couldn't erase with spin or silence. The day before the gala, I met with someone I hadn't seen in years. His name was Elliot Brandt, a former investigative analyst turned financial watchdog, and someone I once briefly dated before I got scared of being vulnerable. I wasn't here for closure. I was here for expertise. I slid the folder across the table to him and asked if what I had was enough. He didn't even finish reading before he looked up and said, "You're sitting on a powder keg. What do you want to do with it?" I answered without hesitation, "Let it burn, but only after I've walked away untouched." He grinned, not because it was funny, but because he understood. He told me to expect a phone call within 48 hours. I left his office lighter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father's voice, firm, dismissive, echoing in the back of my mind from when I was 23. Not everyone is built for leadership, Amara. Some people are meant to support. That sentence had haunted me for years. It lived in my bones. But now all I felt was fire. I arrived at the gala in a sleek black dress stitched with barely there silver thread that caught light with every step. The same dress I had designed myself 3 years ago and never released. I walked into the ballroom like I belonged there, because I did. Conversations paused. Eyes turned. Whispers followed. I smiled tight, controlled. Not warm, not cold. Just confident. A few executives approached me with hollow compliments, trying to gauge where I stood. I offered nothing but vague nods. Then I saw Micah near the stage, glass in hand, his jaw tight. He wasn't used to being the one outshined. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. When the speeches began, my name wasn't mentioned once, even though the room was buzzing about my presence. They couldn't ignore me, but they didn't dare acknowledge me either. Halfway through the CEO's speech, a man I didn't recognize, likely brought in to clean the mess, I felt my phone buzz in my clutch. One text. From Elliot. It started. At first, nothing seemed different. Then someone from the back of the room walked up to the CEO and whispered something in his ear. He stiffened slightly, but kept speaking. Minutes later, phones began lighting up across the ballroom. Investors, board members, media reps, scrolling, pausing, whispering. The press release had gone live. Not from me, but from a third-party watchdog group. It exposed financial mismanagement, unethical restructuring, insider manipulation, and a trail of corruption that led to several senior Langdon and Rowe executives, including Micah, including my mother. And though not named directly, Tessa's ghost hung in every line. The room, once glowing with soft lights and luxury jazz, turned quiet and cold. I watched Micah's face go from confusion to calculation. He excused himself quickly. I let him go. He wasn't my target anymore. As I walked toward the exit, a woman I didn't know caught my arm. She introduced herself as an investor. Her grip was firm, her tone careful. "Is it true you designed the Langdon Studio project?" I nodded. "We'd like to speak with you. Separately." I thanked her and left. Outside, the air was cold for April. My breath made clouds in the dark. I waited for the valet to bring my car, my heart still steady. There were no fireworks, no confrontation. Just the start of a collapse, quiet and precise. The fallout came fast. The following Monday, the story hit major financial publications. Langdon and Rowe's stocks dropped 22% in a single day. Regulatory bodies announced investigations. Key clients pulled contracts. Anonymous sources within the company leaked screenshots, recorded calls, spreadsheets. My email lit up with media requests. I declined all of them. I didn't need to speak. The truth was doing the work for me now. I focused on Langdon Studio. We launched quietly but confidently with a full-scale brand rollout online. Our story wasn't one of revenge. It was one of reinvention. A reclaimed legacy. I didn't hide my name anymore. In fact, I used it to anchor everything. My face was on the homepage. My story was written in the About section.
No exageración. No pity.
Just facts. We signed 3 major development deals in our first quarter. One of them was a client Langdon and Rowe had once rejected for being too small to bother with. I made sure we treated them like gold. But success doesn't come without resistance. A month after the story broke, I got a legal notice from Langdon and Rowe, claiming defamation and breach of contract. My attorney laughed.
They're flailing, he said.
Still, we responded formally. We cited the misappropriated funds, the internal memos, the paper trail. We reminded them that the press hadn't come from me. And we attached one final document, a transcript of a board meeting from 4 years ago. In it, Tessa is recorded saying, "Amara's out. Let's make sure she stays out. Rewrite whatever you have to." It was enough to sink any case they thought they had. A week later, we received word that they were withdrawing the suit.
No apology. No acknowledgement.
Just retreat. But the damage was done. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. A letter from my father. Handwritten. Delivered by courier. It was short. Apologetic, in a way that didn't quite feel real. He said he regretted how things turned out. That he never imagined the company would fall apart like this. That I should have fought harder if I wanted a place. I read it twice, then burned it. Not out of rage, but because I didn't need it. Some apologies come too late, after too much silence. And I wasn't going to carry his guilt. A week later, the board of Langdon and Rowe voted to dissolve the company entirely. Not rebrand. Not restructure. Dissolve. It was over. The name that once stood like a monument was now dust. And mine, the one they mocked, buried, dismissed, was rising, steady and strong. I moved into a new studio downtown. Bright windows, warm wood floors, plants in every corner. My team worked beside me, not under me. Our culture wasn't built on ego or tradition. It was built on trust, clarity, and creativity. Clients came not just for the aesthetic, but for the values. We built places that felt like belonging. We branded businesses that wanted soul, not just polish. And slowly, my past stopped chasing me. Not because it disappeared, but because I stopped running. I left behind the old definitions of success and failure. I created my own. And one morning, sipping coffee on the studio balcony, a young intern asked me what I would have done differently. I thought for a moment and said, nothing. Every wound gave me something they couldn't take back. Strength.
Clarity.
Fire. She smiled and nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she would one day. That afternoon, I received a package. No sender listed. Inside was a framed photo. It was the company's first ever marketing brochure from 25 years ago. My father and Micah on the cover. My name scribbled on the back in marker. Too small for the frame. Cut it. I stared at the handwriting. I'd seen it before. Tessa's. I smiled, slow and steady. Then I flipped the frame over and slipped a new photo in its place. One from last week. Our Langdon studio team, standing in front of a completed project. My face front and center. This time, the frame fit just fine. 6 months passed, and the ashes of Langdon and Rowe had mostly settled into silence. The media had moved on, the lawsuits fizzled out, and the people who once filled boardrooms with polished veneers scattered across other firms, hiding behind new titles. But something lingered beneath the surface. A hum, a shadow, the kind that clings to unfinished business. I had moved on, at least outwardly. Langdon Studio had completed 3 high-profile contracts, and we were nominated for 2 National Design Awards. The team was growing, the space buzzing with energy, and our calendar booked out for 8 months in advance. Yet I could feel it, the weight of something left unresolved. I didn't speak of it aloud, but I felt it in the corners of quiet mornings, in the way I flinched when the past showed up in unexpected places. Like the email that arrived on a cold Thursday morning in October. The sender was anonymous. The subject line read, "You miss something." Inside was one line and one attachment. The line read, "She was never working alone." The attachment was a scanned copy of a property deed, dated 2 years ago, signed by my mother and someone named Charles D. Halpern. I didn't recognize the name, but something about it made my stomach tighten. The property in question? A warehouse in a town I'd never heard of, just outside Phoenix. And listed under it, buried in the fine print, was the name of a shell company. One I had seen before. On those falsified spreadsheets. The ones that led to the collapse. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not my lawyer. Not Elliot. Not even my team. I booked a flight to Arizona the next morning, telling the office I needed a long weekend. The town was small, sun-baked, and quiet. The kind of place you pass through without remembering. But the warehouse was real. Gated.
Locked. Quiet.
It didn't look like much, but my gut screamed otherwise. I waited until nightfall, when the lot was empty. I didn't break in. I didn't need to. I had something better. A contact who owed me a favor, someone who used to audit property security for defunct companies. He got me access. 1 hour. That's all I needed. Inside, the air was dry and stale, the smell of old paper and oil lingering. Rows of boxes lined the walls, some marked, others not. I opened the first one and froze. Inside were files.
Dozens of them.
Employee evaluations, financial reports, contracts. Not old ones. Current. All marked with the same stamp, Halpern Holdings. That name again. And on the side of one box, scrawled in faded ink, L&R off-record storage. I began snapping photos. Page after page. Then I found it. A folder labeled Contingency M. Inside were printed emails between my mother and a man whose name I hadn't seen in years, Gerald Myers, our family's old estate attorney. The emails talked about exit strategies, asset transfers, protective shells. They were planning for failure even before I stepped into the picture. And then one final page. A check. Dated 2 months before Langdon and Rowe collapsed. Made out to Tessa. For $400,000. Memo line. Final payment. I stood there in the center of that warehouse, dust swirling under the dim overhead light, and felt something click into place. Tessa hadn't left. She'd been paid off. Silenced. My family hadn't just buried me. They were burying the entire company long before the public ever knew. It hadn't been about mismanagement. It had been about escape. Quiet, calculated escape. I gathered what I could and left, locking the gate behind me. On the plane home, I didn't sleep. I read every document again, trying to find the thread. And then I saw it. A recurring name on several contracts. C.D. Halpern. Not just a buyer. Not just a lawyer. He was listed as an advisor. Silent partner. I searched every record I could find, every article. Then I found it. Buried in a local business report. C.D. Halpern had just acquired controlling interest in a boutique development firm. One with the exact same signature aesthetic Langdon studio had become known for. The photos showed showrooms that looked eerily familiar, like stolen blueprints of our work. It wasn't theft. It was imitation. And they were using old drafts. The ones we'd discarded years ago. The ones Tessa had access to. I leaned back in my seat, heart pounding. It wasn't over. It had only changed form. They weren't trying to rebuild. They were trying to rebrand. Without me. The next few weeks were quiet, almost deceptively so. I told no one, but I started digging. I traced emails. Shell companies. Real estate deals. I followed Halpern's trail until I found the core, a brand new design firm called Meridian House. Sleek, luxurious, and built on everything they thought they could steal. Their launch was planned for December. A glossy campaign, an influencer-filled event, and a PR campaign already in motion. But I wasn't going to let them succeed.
Not this time.
Not from my blueprint. I contacted Trina, the journalist who'd broken the Langdon and Rowe collapse. She didn't need much convincing. She'd been watching, waiting. "Give me 3 solid pieces of proof," she said, "and I'll tear the veil off." I gave her 10. She didn't write the article immediately. She waited until Meridian House's official launch event. The one filled with champagne, curated lighting, and hired smiles. And then, mid-event, her article went live. The headline: "The Phoenix is a Fraud. How Meridian House was built on a stolen past." The article detailed everything. The money trail, the warehouse, the email correspondence, the designs lifted from Langdon Studios' early archives. She even got an anonymous quote from one of Meridian House's junior architects who had noticed the reuse of suspiciously familiar plans. By morning, it had spread everywhere. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a single thing. But Meridian House's social media went dark. Halpern issued a public statement calling the accusations baseless, but investors began pulling out. Partnerships crumbled. The firm's credibility dissolved before it ever solidified. And I received one final email from an unlisted address. It read, "You never belonged. You stole everything you have." I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Elliot, who traced the source. It came from Tessa's last known device. She was still watching, still bitter. But it didn't matter, because the world had already turned. My studio grew threefold in the following months. We opened a second office. We were invited to speak at design conferences. And in one ironic twist of fate, a former Langdon and Rowe investor reached out asking to back my next project. I declined politely. Not out of spite, out of peace. I had rebuilt myself from silence and dust. I didn't need them anymore. But even peace has a price. One rainy evening, I found a package at my doorstep. No label. Inside was a journal. My mother's. Pages filled with entries. Some bitter, some cold, but one near the end stopped me. She had written, "I never knew how to love Amara without control." Maybe that was my flaw. Maybe I lost the only thing I was ever supposed to protect. I closed the book and didn't cry. Some wounds don't need tears.
They just need time.
And as I sat by the window, watching the rain trail down the glass, I realized something. They had tried to erase me, rewrite me, duplicate me. And they failed every time. Because I wasn't built from approval. I was built from fire. The journal stayed on my nightstand for days, untouched after that night. I couldn't bring myself to read more. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. Every word felt like it weighed 10 pounds. My mother had written it over the span of a decade, back when I thought she had no opinions about me at all. Turns out, she had too many. Some entries read like reports, calculating, cold. Others were raw, scattered reflections of a woman trying to justify choices she must have known were cruel. I didn't search for apology in those pages. I wasn't looking for closure. But one detail stood out, a name repeated again and again in the margins. The Marchand account. Scribbled, circled, referenced. I had never heard of it. Not in meetings, not in the files I'd recovered, not even in the aftermath of Langdon and Rowe's fall. Whatever it was, it had been kept out of reach. I took the name to Elliot, who immediately recognized it. "Marchand wasn't a client," he said, pulling up old banking records. "It was a fund. Private. Hidden in a blind trust. And from what I can tell, it's still active." I leaned closer as he scrolled through flagged transactions, small, scattered, but persistent. Money being moved in and out. The trail led to a bank in Zurich, buried behind layers of fake owners and numbered accounts. One name appeared again, Halpern. Again and again, always attached. "This wasn't just a backup plan," Elliot said. "This was the real nest egg. Everything else was noise." I stared at the screen. The pieces clicked into place. While Langdon and Rowe was imploding, while lawsuits were flying, while I was rebuilding from scraps, they were still profiting. Quietly. Invisibly. I flew to Zurich the following week without telling anyone. The city was cold, glassy, almost sterile. I had no appointment, no contact. Just a copy of the journal and a folder of documents that tied the Marchand account to my mother and Halpern. I spent 2 days knocking on doors, pushing my luck, pulling strings. Then, on the third day, I met someone, an assistant manager, who used to work in compliance and recognized the Langdon name. She didn't break confidentiality, not openly. But she hinted. A code name, a structure, and one word that made my breath freeze. Inheritor. One of the accounts was marked for transfer, scheduled 6 weeks from now, and listed on the paperwork was a familiar signature.
Tessa.
I returned to the hotel room shaking with something I couldn't name. Betrayal no longer felt big enough. This was manipulation at a surgical level. The plan hadn't failed. It had worked. They'd sacrificed the company, paid the right people, buried the right files, and walked away with a true fortune intact. And Tessa was about to take it all. I stayed up all night drafting an affidavit, attaching the financial proof, the journal excerpts, the trail Halpern thought he'd covered. I filed it under Swiss jurisdiction through a lawyer Elliot recommended. It wouldn't stop the transfer immediately, but it would delay it. It would raise questions. And in the quiet world of private wealth, questions were poison. When I returned home, I didn't go back to the studio right away. I needed air, space. I drove out to the edge of the coast, to a small cabin I hadn't visited since college. It had once belonged to my grandmother, the only person who had ever looked at me like I mattered just for breathing. She'd died long before the family turned into a machine, before Micah became a title and Tessa became a weapon. The cabin was mostly untouched. Dusty, weathered, but familiar. I lit a fire, opened the windows, and sat on the floor surrounded by silence. That night, I opened the journal again, near the end, looking for something I hadn't known to look for before. And I found it. A single paragraph, dated the day before I was cut out of the will. She dreams too much. That's the problem. She'll never learn how to survive if we keep giving her pieces. Better to let her struggle. Let her build her own spine. I read it twice. Then again. It wasn't just cruelty. It was deliberate. They hadn't removed me because I failed. They removed me because they were trying to break me into someone else. Someone who begged. Someone who bent. Someone who became manageable. But I hadn't. And that was why they feared me. I closed the journal, stood up, and felt something settle inside me. Not pain, not even rage.
Power.
Pure, quiet power. The next day, I returned to the studio and found an envelope on my desk.
No stamp. No handwriting.
Inside, one photo. Tessa standing beside a man in a gray suit, Halpern, smiling. In the background was a doorway with a plaque. Marchand and Company, Zurich office. The message was obvious. She knew I'd found it, and she wasn't scared. But she should have been. I scheduled a meeting with Trina that same week. Not for an article. Not yet. For something bigger. I want the world to know what they never could say to my face, I told her. I want to bury the lie that I was ever the disgrace. She leaned in, tapping her pen. Then we'll need a full timeline. Voices. Receipts. You ready to pull it all out? I didn't hesitate.
Yes.
All of it. Over the next 2 weeks, I recorded everything. Interviews. Confessions. Documents. Photos. Financial trails. And when Trina was ready, she said one thing before pressing publish. This isn't revenge. This is resurrection. The article hit in January. The Inheritor's Lie, how one family used collapse to hide a global trust scheme. It went viral in 12 hours. By the end of the week, government agencies opened inquiries. Switzerland froze the Marchand account. Halpern disappeared from all professional registries. And Tessa, who had just signed a keynote speaking contract for a female empowerment summit, was dropped without explanation. She sent no public statement. But one night, I found her outside my building.
She didn't yell.
She didn't beg. She simply looked at me and said, "You are never supposed to win." I looked back at her, eyes level, voice steady. That's why I did. And then I walked past her like she wasn't a threat anymore. Because she wasn't. Back in the studio, I stood in front of the wall we'd left blank since opening. A massive white canvas, framed but untouched. It was meant to be filled when we were ready. That day, I painted one line across the center. Sharp, black, and undeniable. Not art, just truth. And beneath it I wrote, "We were never broken, just buried." My team clapped. Some quietly cried. And I smiled, not the kind that begged for recognition. The kind that came from finally being free. 2 months after the article exploded, I was sitting in a sunlit meeting room in New York, finalizing our expansion contract with an international hotel chain, when I got the call. Elliot's voice was calm, but beneath it was something heavier. He said the investigation had uncovered one last layer, something deeper, older, and more dangerous. I thought we had already dug up everything, trusts, offshore accounts, false signatures, but he had found something even I didn't know existed. A second trust. One created 23 years ago, before Langdon and Rowe had even fully formed, back when my parents were still operating from a small duplex office in Houston. This trust wasn't created in their name. It was in mine. I froze. Elliot paused before continuing. It was opened under the name, the Langdon Creative Development Fund, initially seeded with just under $100,000. Your name was listed as the sole beneficiary. I couldn't speak. He went on. It was funded annually by one anonymous contributor. No withdrawals. No activity. Just preserved. I hung up without fully processing the rest. A fund? In my name?
Why?
Who? I barely remembered being a child in those years. I only remembered being sidelined, silenced, shaped. I flew to Houston that weekend.
Alone.
Quietly. I didn't tell my team. I didn't even bring my assistant. I walked the old streets near our childhood home. The places where I first scribbled on napkins during office parties, where I once showed my mom a sketch of a hotel lobby, and she told me I should focus on something more practical. I went to the records office with Elliot's contact and pulled the original papers. The fund was real, still active, still untouched. And the name of the anonymous contributor? A man named Thomas Greer. It hit me like a wave. He was my grandmother's former lawyer. He had passed away years ago, but beside his name, scrawled in shaky pen, was a note. To protect what she will one day build. The date? The week after my grandmother's funeral. I sat down on the marble floor of the hallway and let the truth wash over me. My grandmother had seen it coming. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Enough to know that I'd need something no one could take. A seed of freedom. An anchor outside their system. That night, I stood at her grave in a quiet, forgotten cemetery and whispered one sentence. You are the only one who saw me. The wind moved through the trees like a sigh. For the first time in a long time, I cried. When I returned home, I used part of the fund to create something new, not a business, not a project, but a grant. The Langdon Phoenix Fund. It offered resources, mentorship, and seed capital to women who had been pushed out of companies they helped build. Women who had been rewritten, sidelined, erased. The announcement came quietly, without fanfare. But applications poured in. Stories poured in. And through them, I found a new kind of purpose. Not revenge. Not even redemption. Legacy. But my kind. My definition. In the middle of all this, one final twist landed at my feet. A formal letter, hand-delivered, sealed with gold trim. It was from the remaining shareholders of Langdon and Rowe. The remnants, now little more than a ghost corporation. They were offering me full rights to the Langdon name. Every trademark. Every domain. Every bit of intellectual property. In exchange for a formal statement of neutrality, the letter read, no lawsuits. No articles. Just silence. A peace offering. An admission. I laughed when I read it. Then I handed it to my lawyer and said, draft the release. But I'm not keeping the name. That afternoon, I walked into the studio and called a meeting. My team gathered. Designers, coordinators, interns, friends. The people who helped me rise. I looked at the Langdon Studio logo on the wall, paused, and said, it's time we changed it. Confused glances followed. I continued, This company was built from my name, yes, but also from the names of people who believed in something better. A name shouldn't be about ego. It should be about belief. The new name unveiled that day was simple, powerful, Arka, a Sanskrit word meaning light, radiance, and beginning. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about all of us. The applause was quiet at first, then louder, and then a standing ovation.
Not for the change.
But for the freedom. Weeks passed, then months, and one evening, just as winter began softening into spring, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 2 words, she's gone. It took me a moment to understand. Then another message came through. Tessa left the country. No charges filed. Disappeared. I stared at the screen, unmoved. Some endings are loud. Others slip away. And hers was always going to be a ghost story. That night, I walked through the studio long after everyone had gone. The light outside was golden, pouring across the polished floors. I stopped at the edge of the balcony, overlooking the city we had built from dreams and dirt. And I finally breathed. No more ghosts. No more games. Just future. A year after the fall of Langdon and Rowe, I gave a keynote at a Women's Innovation Summit. The host introduced me not as a CEO or a designer, but as a woman who refused to be erased. I stood at the podium, heart steady, and looked out at a sea of young faces, some full of hope, others full of hurt. I told them my story, not the names, not the details, just the truth,
The shame.
the silence, the fight. And I ended with the line that had carried me through it all. Sometimes, the best way to win is to become someone they can no longer control. The room rose to its feet. Not for me, but for themselves. In the years that followed, ARK grew into something I hadn't dared to imagine. We became more than a company. We became a movement. A symbol of resilience. Of women reclaiming what was stolen. I never returned to the family home. Never saw Micah again. Never received another letter from my mother. But one day, I got a call from an unknown number. A soft voice. "You don't know me," she said. "But I read your story. I was once where you were. You gave me courage." I didn't need to ask her name. She was one of many. The legacy I had built wasn't made of glass towers or gilded portfolios. It was made of stories, mine, and every woman who chose to rise. And so, if you ask who I am now, I won't tell you I'm the girl they called a disgrace. I'll tell you I'm the woman who made that word irrelevant, who turned silence into strategy, loss into legacy. I'll tell you that my face now lives on a company they no longer control, a name they can't bury, and a future they'll never be part of. Because I was never the disgrace. I was the beginning.